Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday to you. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. I'm your host, Pete Pardo, in the co-captain's chair. Once again, Mr. Martin Popoff. Good morning, Martin. How are you on this? I don't know about you, but snowy Monday morning here in New York.
Yeah, we're supposed to maybe get some snow here in Toronto. I'm looking outside right now. It's definitely cold. It's cold enough to do it. This would be our second or third snowstorm when it comes, but got the winter tires on and all that, so all set for it.
Oh, so you've already had two or three. Yeah, this is we had a couple flakes a couple of weeks ago, but this, I mean, it's not supposed to do much of anything, but I still haven't even like gotten the snowblower ready. I haven't moved the I have a place in my garage where I got snowblower and the lawnmower, and I have to switch them around and get the lawnmower ready. I got to do that because apparently we're getting hit with something on Wednesday. So I'm like, I'm a little bit behind the curve. But for today, it's all about Faith No More. So kind of a interesting band. I have never, ever known how to classify this band. It's like, when you talk about the music of Faith No More, not a lot of albums. They've been kind of sporadic throughout their career, but a band you just can't even categorize. Are they metal? Are they alternative? Are they alternative metal? Are they funk metal? Are they rap metal? Are they just vaudevillian avant-garde? Or are they all of that rolled into one?
Yeah, that's a great description because you brought up most of the things that they do, right? I mean, I'm not sure if you said post-punk, but post-punk
is certainly, yeah.
Grunge, nascent or pre-grunge, the funk metal, the Red Hot Chili Peppers situation there as well, which we'll get into a little bit, hopefully, if I remember. But it's really interesting. It was an exciting time. The cool thing about this is that this is right where bands were trying to find other ways to be heavy because hair metal was just getting ridiculous. Thrash had been around for a while. Death metal's coming up as well. But this whole idea of an alternative metal, Faith No More was definitely one of the first bands in there. And although they're not a grunge band, they get a lot of credit for inspiring and exciting even those bands up the coast to do something new with heaviness, right?
Yeah, and I'd say too, excuse me, that especially like their second, third, and fourth albums, maybe a little too early to the game. I would say that, in re-listening to this catalog over the last week, a couple of those albums, I'm thinking, man, if they would have released those, like, could you imagine if and the Real Thing was a pretty big album, but could you imagine if that came out like in 92, 93?
Boy, I never really thought about that. I mean, I don't know. That's an interesting concept. I mean, look at all of these with that lens. I actually did an episode of my History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff podcast on Faith No More. And I actually, because I don't want to do one just on a band. Right. So what I did is I looked at the concept of how commercial are they and the commercialism of each album through time. And that's kind of a similar thing. So I've never really thought of it directly linked to time, but
I mean, these guys were alternative before there was an alternative.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, they were ahead of their time, I think. Yeah. And I don't think they get enough credit for helping out with a lot of the stuff that came in the early, mid to late 90s in its wake. And when, by that time, Faith No More already struggling to find, to keep an audience. I don't know. To me, the more I listen to this stuff, the more I'm like, man, they were like way ahead of the game, I think.
Yeah. Well, okay. More of that'll come up as we go through each one. Because
so we got 7 albums here in total. So I'll have Martin kick us off with this number 7.
Okay. So my first one, I'm going to go with the debut, We Care a Lot, November 1985. This thing comes out. And again, what a great album and what a hard catalog to categorize, but also to rank. When I look at my rankings, I've got kind of a bank of 4 that I'm having, actually 1, 2, 3, 4 that I'm having a hard time juggling the order of, and then 3 at the end that I'm having a hard time juggling. Well, actually, I'm pretty good on those ones. But so I picked the debut, and I almost feel a little guilty because what a pioneering album for 1985. Again, the We Care a Lot album is, Chuck Mosley on vocals. that weird album cover that looks kind of religious or Jewish or something with the star, right? And those odd colors. It's just such a strange looking piece of art for an album cover, right? But again, we talked a little bit about it. Post-punk, the keyboards in there are a little kind of creepy and British sounding. It's very rhythmic, so it's post-punk in kind of like a Killing Joke, Joy Division way as well. You've got, the big slamming Mike Borden style in there, and the big, the Billy Gould bass sound in there. So a really interesting sound. I even heard a little bit of Green River, because Green River is the outlier in the grunge thing in terms of getting something out really early. They had an EP on Homestead right around this time. So 85 is super early for alternative metal, for a new kind of metal that really hadn't existed before. And that's kind of what they're doing on this. I think the production is really good on it. The snare drum's a little loud. But yeah, why do you bother? Again, really cool rhythmic one. The Jungle is cool. That's one of the kind of less hookier ones. My favorites would be As the Worm Turns. Really cool melody on that. Arabian Disco, they got a song called that. You could throw that into the pot as a description of what they do, right? Because they actually sound like Arabian Disco every once in a while on these albums. So yeah, it's these guys. Jane's Addiction at the same time. So there's some cool stuff going on in California. I remember being into the likes of the Minneapolis stuff, Husker Du, Soul Asylum, Replacements, Firehose, Minutemen. It all kind of is in this big melange. But the neat thing about this is they're finding new, interesting ways to be heavy, even before hair metal's really all that old at this point. They're already looking ahead. So as you said earlier, super pioneering band. So I'm going to put this one last, but it's, out of 10, it's probably a 7.5. Like, it's a really pretty darn good album too.
So it's my number 7 as well.
Okay.
But I'm not as nuts about it as you are.
Okay.
I am not a punk guy. I have never been. So this album to me, it's metallic post-punk is, to me, that's what I hear. And a little bit too much for my liking. And I've said it before, I've been saying it for years, I don't like Chuck's vocals at all. Okay. For me, when they moved on from him, is the best thing this band ever did. So his vocals really ruined the first 2 albums for me anyway. But there is some pretty groundbreaking stuff on here. I will give it that. I think it's very influential, way ahead of its time. It's just not necessarily what I go to. I think the title track is a great song. I love Pills for Breakfast. I mean, how cool of an instrumental is that?
Yeah, really cool. Yeah.
And these guys would occasionally do these really cool instrumentals. I'm like, oh, I would love to hear more of that, because like they were great musicians, this band. I mean, the bass is killer. Jim Martin, I always loved him as a guitar player. Those keyboards are awesome, and you hit it right on the nail. Those spooky kind of British sounding keyboards, they almost sound like they don't belong. And I think that's what was so cool about this band, is that even though for me personally, a little too much of the punk thing on this album and even the next one, but they were throwing all these other things into the mix that just made them like, where is this band coming from? Right? Because this 85. And that's, when I was going back and re-listening to these albums, you almost forget how far back these guys went. And that's like pretty crazy stuff. So it's my number 7. I don't enjoy this album that much, but I totally understand its significance and all that. My little nitpickings aside, I think it was a very important album in this whole kind of movement that really didn't start to really break big till like 5 or 6 years later.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Okay. So my number 6, again, I feel guilty putting this here because it's actually a really cool album. I'm putting their last album, the reunion quote unquote album, Sol Invictus. I'm starting to like it quite a bit more now. It is pretty standoffish and dark. I love the opening track, the title track, really kind of commercial and rocking. I mean, I want them to be a little more commercial than they are, this band. And that's why I did that episode about the commerciality and their relationship to it over time, because this is a band that really did not try to be very commercial almost all the time. I mean, when we get to Real Thing, we can talk about that a little more, but definitely a very anti-commercial band who happened to be big because of the integrity of doing such a thing, right? I really, really love Sunny Side Up. Cool ballad. Again, it's the most commercial song on it, I would say. Black Friday is kind of jangly and kind of the whispery thing. So what Mike Patton does on this a lot is he's really, this is probably the album out of the entire catalog the most where he's taking that Mr. Bungle and Fantoma's toolbox of his voice and putting it into a Faith No More album. He does it a lot, but it never sounds way too much or over the top. It really fits in, and you're like totally being entertained by all this crazy stuff he's doing with his voice in here. It never sounds, it never really detracts from the songs. And the songs are, you know, mostly kind of mellow and dark and quiet on this album. Spooky. You know, he's doing his whisper thing. He's low reg a lot. So it's kind of a laid back album, but it's just loaded with artistic integrity and weird creativity. And you just got to give him a thumbs up for doing that. But yeah, it's still one of these that it's going to take even more months and years for it to sink in.
Yeah, I mean, it's 5 years ago, right? And it's still, it's like, I had a really hard time with where to put Soul Invictus because it's still, I mean, I know 5 years is not new, but it's, you know, one of the things that the mantra of this band should have always been, we dare to be different. Yeah. And that album has some really different stuff on it. But again, it's Faith No More because you never know what kind of curveball they're going to throw you. So that album more than anyone else in this list kind of went all over the place while I was putting this list together. It was originally also my number 6, but then I went back and I'm like, you know what? I just can't stand Chuck's vocals. So I automatically put Introduce Yourself as number 6, which I know is going to upset a lot of people because that's a pretty beloved album in this catalog. And I totally get it. I like the album personally. I just can't stand his vocals. And sometimes, I mean, you've said it a million times, Martin, for you, like the make or break is usually the singer.
Yeah.
And the most important part. I can't stand his vocals.
I'll save my opinion for later, but
there you go.
Yes, I do agree the singer's super important, but keep going.
Yeah. So, but you know, this album has even better production than the first album. It's a much slicker album. It's a much heavier album. Faster disco, great song. Introduce Yourself is I mean, you got punk and funk kind of collide in there. I love Death March. They redo We Care a Lot once again. Did they need to do that again? I don't know. They figure, now they got the label deal. They know it's a hit song. So I totally get that. I love Blood. That's like a really cool headbanging metal song, which, they would do tunes like that on almost every album. Spirit is also pretty heavy. I think it's a really solid record. I know it's going to be a favorite for a lot of people. Again, I just don't like Chuck Mosley's vocals. Just okay. They ruined the first 2 albums for me, and ruin being, I'll use that lightly. The songs are really good. His vocals just don't click with me at all.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I did a last minute switch here. Actually, I did a this morning switch, and I moved this record down 1 notch. So I went with Angel Dust as my number 5. Hugely disappointed when this came out because it was so anti-commercial compared to the real thing. And as I play it, and as I sort of, was preparing for this and playing it against the other ones that are semi-similar, basically the middle core of this catalog, I felt like it was a little, they are definitely being different for different sake, and there is this rhythmicness is a big part of their sound, but I felt like it was a little too not straightened out on this album. It just sounds a little awkward and stilted, and the arrangements are a little too crude. Although it's hard to say crude when it comes to a big major label production like this. I love that album cover. It's so cool, but it's so disturbing too, because, it's the contrast between this beautiful bird and then the, angel dust, which is one of the nastier drugs that has ever been invented. Right. So it's like, okay, is this a picture of angel dust, it's all, and then the back you get the hanging dead meat, right?
Yeah.
So Caffeine, a very kind of stilted one. RV is that mellow one, which is kind of cool. Midlife Crisis was a great song and a great single. Really like that a lot. Be Aggressive is cool with those kind of like girl school
Aggressive
singers. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Kindergarten was a cool one. Melodic enough, rhythmic. So I was yearning some melody, right? And I always compared this a little bit to Ministry Filth Pig in terms of the really trying to be anti-commercial, or Nirvana Incesticide, right? Being quite aggressive commercial against you just had a huge hit album, and then you do this, right? So it's really cool. Again, the idea, what's really a lot of integrity here is now we are into well into the grunge years, and creativity is completely allowed and respected and being surprising. And this was very surprising. And I remember interviewing the guys about this album, and they said that, so this went gold in the States, but in Europe, apparently it sold 2 million copies across Europe, if they're not exaggerating. So they say basically that Europe really got it and they understood it. I mean, maybe they have darker souls and more creative or whatever, but America certainly didn't get it. So they went from a platinum album down to a gold album for this one. And really, this only went gold because people hoped or thought it was going to sound like the other one. And if they knew this album and heard it ahead of time, there's no way it would have sold gold, right?
Yeah, it's nothing like the previous album for sure.
Yeah,
and it took them a while to get that to release that. I mean, that came like almost 3 years after the fact. I mean, that's
92 versus 89. Yeah. Okay, there you go. That's my number 5.
All right, my number 5 is 1997's album of the year.
Okay.
Another strong album, maybe not quite an album of the year candidate in 1997, but still a pretty good album. You got, they had switching guitar players like crazy in this band. You got John Hudson coming in now. Some good songs on here. You got Collision, pretty heavy song, great Roddy Bottom keys on the Last Cup of Sorrow. He's such a really good keyboard player, but he's not showy. He adds like these really cool textures and blips and bleeps and sounds and things like that. Just a really cool guy in this band. Naked in Front of the Computer is, kind of frantic, kind of punky metal almost. Mouth to Mouth is just wacky as shit. I mean, some of this stuff is just like so off the wall. And I guess you got to give Mike Patton a lot of credit for that. I mean, it's just
that's the Arabian Disco one.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, some of this stuff is just so, weird, but weird in a good way. Ashes to Ashes, really cool, moody song, great chorus. That's probably one of the catchiest songs on the album. Got That Feeling, big and groovy and heavy. Patton, just the man of 1,000 voices, I always call him. I mean, he's just like, in the span of one 5-minute song, you'll hear like 4 or 5 or 6 different vocal styles, and he does that in that song. Then you got Pristina, which is a really lovely track, and this would be their last album for almost 2 decades. I mean, it's crazy to think that they went such a long way in between albums around this point. But again, I think the band was struggling to really figure out where they fit into the rock world at this time, and they took a really long break after this. But I think it's a good album.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. And this is the one I switched with Angel Dust. I went with the same album of the year. Playing it again, this one and King for a Day are the ones I actually play the most these days on my iPod, driving around or jogging or whatever. So what I like about this record is it is one of those core, almost the trilogy of records in the middle, with Angel Dust of being a little almost like an unsettled or uncompletely realized version of the sound that they get on King for a Day and Album of the Year. And then Soul Invictus being, given that massive gap, it actually is a perfectly logical or sensible extension of Album of the Year. But yeah, I agree. I think this has some good heaviness to it. I like that the production is really conservative. It's just a good, tight, heavy production. You hear the guitars. In the early days, which we talked about a bit, and I'll get to a little later. I mean, it was a lot more about the drums and the bass, and I think here you get you know, a tighter range, a compressed range of it's basically a, you know, a guitar, bass, and drums band, but you know, the guitar is pretty central to the whole thing. I love Last Cup of Sorrow. I love Strip Search. Collision is a cool, heavy one, but you know, this is an album where that whole thing about them being somewhat of a kind of a progressive metal band comes in as well. And I was even thinking like a little bit King Crimson when I think of this band.
Yeah,
Yeah. Which is
absolutely.
weird, you know, to say, because they're an alternative band and a, you know, a California
They
blues
have this
band.
the use of dissonance at times is very
Yeah,
Crimsonish. The
yeah,
little jagged guitar textures, and you know, you hear these passages that kind of almost don't make sense, but they do, but they work, right? And
yeah.
King Crimson has done that their entire career. So yeah, I actually, when I was kind of jotting down notes and re-listening to these, King Crimson came up in my mind a couple times as well.
Yeah, yeah. And that dissonance is usually what I don't want to hear out of them so much. I mean, I love the creative bravery and the fearlessness of doing that and realizing we're not going to be big rock stars if we do that all the time or
Yeah,
so
yeah.
often. Because I want commercial Faith No More. That's kind of what I like, right, out of this band. But I also like being challenged in that as well. So I've moved this up to 4, and I do play it a lot. And you know, this also fits in that whole idea that you mentioned, you know, perfectly articulated about Saul Invictus being 5 years old now, and you still don't feel you got a handle on it, right? So this is a band that you can keep listening to a lot. You know, when we were on with Hack the other day, and you know, Volume 4 is an album like that for Black Sabbath for me. You could keep listening to over and over and over because you never feel you completely master it. And for me, 2 bands that are like that are Kansas and Genesis. I just feel like I could play that stuff over and over and over again, and and still it always sounds fresh, and I'm never getting too incredibly sick of it. And that's definitely that happens with the Faith No More catalog because it's so, you know, so intricate and so many weird things going on. So there you go. There's my number 4.
Cool. My number 4 is Soul Invictus.
Okay.
You know, first album in what, 18 years, but it's as if they never went away, because it just sounds like the natural follow up to the one before it. You know, a lot of cool songs on this one as well. You got the you know, superhero, upbeat, those maniacal vocals. I mean, you know, Patton's just like all over the place as always. You know, killer bass, lots of grooves. The riffs are great. You know, Sunny Side Up, what a great song. I mean, that's just kind of intoxicating, just like easy listening Faith No More. It's got all the hooks you need. Separation
Cool rhythm
Anxiety.
too, eh? Cool rhythm to it, like the
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, that's just a really great track.
yeah.
As well as the grooves to Separation Anxiety. That's another one. I mean, these guys knew how to lock into a groove, and that, you know, great drummer, great bass player. I mean, as long as you got that, that's what you'll get. Cone of Shame is another really great song. It's heavy and it's really catchy. Matador's got lots of nice textures and it rocks. I think it's a strong album. That, again, like you mentioned, we're still kind of trying to figure out how much we really like this album 5 years afterwards, right? So, but it's like they never went away, and that's the cool thing. I mean, that's not something that happens that often when you have like a veteran band that takes a long break and then comes back. Either, you know, they come back and they still sound like that band, or they come back and they're like, oh, that doesn't sound anything like what they used to do, and then people get up in arms. I think Faith No More came back and they put out a Faith No More album.
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah. All right. Okay, so my number 3 is The Real Thing. And at one point, I wanted to put this almost 2 spots lower. You know, it's moved around a little for me, and then I kind of revisited it again and go, man, these songs are all so good. You just can't fault this album. You can't knock it down too much. The production's a little bright for me. It's definitely very, very bright and trebly. You know, it's a big Matt Wallace production. I mean, when I say that, I mean it's he doesn't have a characteristic really, but this is very, very bright on the high end with the cymbals and all that. The bass is very articulated, great sounding bass, but it's very high fidelity and very, very articulated, like I say. So 89, this thing goes platinum. What I love about this is that, you know, this is a band being rewarded for being a great, interesting band. They're a buzz band already. They were a buzz band with We Care a Lot, which was a big single and such a catchy song, right? They had that humor in them, but they do the big Bruce Dickinson, Paul Di'Anno thing, like right when they're right off of the Buzz Band album where everybody's talking about Faith No More. I mean, I remember getting that second album. That was the first one I think I got as a new release. It wasn't the debut. It was the Introduce Yourself album. But everybody was talking about this band, and then they switched the singer. So Mike Patton comes in. He's only, apparently 19, 20 years old. All the music is done, essentially, and he, in the course of a week or two, has to put lyrics on top of it. What I found surprising in revisiting this album again, which I played a million times when it first came out, was he's really doing that twangy Mike Patton voice, that he turned into one of the great versatile vocalists, doing a million things later, like the Man of a Thousand Faces, right? Rubber Face, right? All that, basically he's like the vocalist of, multi-personality vocalist. But here he's doing that kind of, remember that whole funk metal thing with T-Ride and Dan Reed Network?
Yep.
There were a few other bands in that. I should do a whole episode of my thing on that, because that was a funny little thing. And so at the time it was called funk metal. So this is before it was called rap metal. In a way, it was called funk metal, and it also, if you want to look at a birth of that, it's probably Prince, Purple Rain, right? You get guitar mixed with funk, and that causes the likes of T-Ride and Dan Reed Network. And yeah, I wish I could remember the other bands, but this band kind of fell into that. Remember Scatterbrain? They were kind of part of this.
Right? I remember Scatterbrain. Yeah.
Yeah. Ugly Kid Joe a little bit was compared to Faith No More at the time as well, right? But yeah, super heavy songs, like great guitar work. Yeah, this is like Jim Martin's Stadium Rock album. There was that controversy with the Red Hot Chili Peppers where they thought they were stealing their shtick, and they kind of were a little bit. But this is almost like the for anybody who's a headbanger who liked Red Hot Chili Peppers, this is like taking those little bits of Red Hot Chili Peppers you like and making a whole album of it. Like, it's the guitar, it's the rock. There is this interesting new thing, i.e. new, but Red Hot Chili Peppers already did it before, of rapping over rock music, kind of, right? So they are stealing their shtick in a lot of ways. And apparently Mike Patton had a look, that was a lot, Anthony Kiedis at the time as well, right? So there are a lot of things. There's a lot of things that don't date so well about this whole thing, because they were inventing something brand new at the time. Because this is also an album that is a super, super important album in the birth of nu metal, right? That whole massive multi-platinum, huge form of heavy metal called nu metal. The real thing is a big, super early cornerstone in that whole thing, en route to Korn and even Sepultura, with what's not Chaos AD, Roots, the Ross Robinson thing and all that. I mean, it's a very complicated history, nu metal, but this actually fits in it as well. So yeah. Again, it was almost like I went through this album and I wanted to rank it lower, but it's like every song is just a gem. Everything is just so well paced and sequenced. It's commercial, so I just love everything about it. It's hard to fault it. So that's my number 3.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great album, and I played a ton out of that when it first came out. But I totally agree with you. It's like, that's not really the Mike Patton that we all came to know on that album. It's almost like, I'm the new guy here. I'm going to kind of play it safe. Yeah, he sings, most of that album in that certain kind of high-pitched, kind of sneaky, twangy thing that he does, and it fits the songs perfectly. But then I think the real Mike Patton stood up on Angel Dust. That was the Mike Patton, and going forward, right? All right, my number 3, I'm going to go with King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime.
Yeah.
So, again, here we have the first kind of, we had the change in vocals, the album before, and now we got founding member Jim Martin, who I was pretty disappointed when he left the band. Got a new guy coming in, Trey Spruance, who did the album, but then didn't do the tour, and they got another guy in, Dean Menta. So, they had the guitar chair was kind of, a revolving cast of characters there for a little bit. But really solid album, I thought. I remember when it came out, completely different than Angel Dust. But I think the real Faith No More that we were going to see going forward appeared on King for a Day. Because I think the real thing was kind of an outlier here. I think Angel Dust was kind of an outlier. I think King for a Day, Soul Invictus, Album of the Year, that all those albums have like the typical Faith No More sound. But again, you have to wonder if the experience with Angel Dust in the eyes of the general public kind of ruined what could have been a really huge album for these guys, because I think King for a Day is pretty accessible, pretty catchy record, but it didn't do huge business. So you have to wonder, like, again, we're looking at, so it's 95 as opposed to 89 when The Real Thing came out. That's 6 years. A lot can happen in 6 years, right? But a lot of good songs in here. Get Out, heavy song, raucous, Ricochet, catchy alternative rock, Evidence, kind of jazzy, right? It's like all of a sudden they've got these jazzy elements coming in here, which is pretty neat. What else we got? Dig in the Grave, catchy, lots of hooks. One of my favorite numbers on the album. Cuckoo for Caca. I mean, that's just like it. That again, it's like one of these all over the place tunes. It's kind of metal. It's kind of almost like hardcore in spots. Just really, really cool. What else? The Last to Know, another really good song. All right, and Patton's wide range of vocal styles. He's doing the laid back kind of lounge jazz singer. He's doing the maniacal shrieker. He's doing the hardcore bark. He's a little bit of everything, right? He's just like, who is this guy, right? Has there ever been a singer like this? I don't know. And there's a reason why I think Mike Patton has become so beloved over the years, because he's that singer for everybody. No matter what style he's singing in, there's a fan of that style. And there's a lot of people who really appreciate someone who can do multiple things like he does. And he never kind of pigeonholes himself into a certain spot. So I think that's why I think, years from now, when you look back at like the great vocalists, rock vocalists of this kind of the 90s era, Mike Patton's going to be like one of those guys that's looked at with a lot of reverence going forward. So, a good album, really good album.
I think the other reason he's beloved is because he's just one of the purest artists you'll ever meet, right? He just absolutely pursues his muse, and he's just fearless about where it takes him.
Does what he wants.
Yep. It's almost like if he made 10 albums that sounded exactly the same, we would all still love him and champion him because we'd know he believed it, right? Yeah. And he knew he had 10 albums exactly the same in him. So it's almost like the fact that he has done so many different things. That's almost irrelevant because it's more like we know he's doing them for the right reasons, because he's just an incredible. He loves art. He loves being an artist.
Yes. Yeah, it's like I got this bug up my butt to do this kind of album, and I don't care if it sells or not. I'm going to put it out.
Yeah.
And that's what a true artist does, right? You got to take what you're feeling inside of you and put it to, whether you're painting something, writing something, or creating, a piece of music, you're doing what you want, commercial success or not. This is what's coming from me. This is totally me. So, and I totally agree with it. I think that's another reason why people just absolutely love him, because it's like, I'm Mike Patton. I'm going to do what I want. You can buy it, or you cannot, but this is me.
Yeah.
And it's like he puts himself out there all the time, regardless of whether the critics like it or don't, or whether the fans like it or not. And that there's something to be said about that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of when I ever saw him live. And it was actually the Real Thing tour in a small club in Toronto. I think I saw him at the Rock and Roll Heaven in Toronto when I just first moved here, and that place eventually closed down. But then I saw Fantomas at the Opera House. And I could not believe how entertained I was by that, right? I mean, it's a pretty obscure thing to be seeing, but they turned it into art. And I believe, actually, I saw him a second time too. And I think I've seen Fantomas twice, actually. Once at the Horseshoe and once at the Opera House. And one time for sure, Dave Lombardo was drumming for them. And the other time, I can't remember who was drumming. But again, somehow, for this guy who's very impatient at live shows, somehow he turned that obscure art into something completely entertaining. So there he is, succeeding in this art, right?
Yeah, I only caught them once. I saw them open up a Giant Stadium, that big tour with Guns N' Roses and Metallica. So that was what, 92, I think. So this was Angel Dust tour. And, you know, there was like 80,000 people there, and they were terrific.
Yeah.
They were terrific. And I'd argue that they were the best band of the day, because
Cool.
Guns N' Roses were awful. This was, you might have even heard stories of this show. They came on like almost 2 hours late, and Axl, you know, got on stage, and obviously he was wasted, and he was just being a dick to the road crew. He was like swearing and cursing at the audience, we were pretty upset that we had to wait that long. And it just, the whole performance was just a mess. And Metallica were great that day, but I thought Faith No More were just like amazing, really, really good. And that was the only time I ever got to see them.
All right. Okay, so my number 2, that's what we're at, right? You want, you want my, okay, second top album. I'm going with Introduce Yourself. So the topic of Chuck, I actually got to interview Chuck later on in life, so that was good. Obviously, he's passed on. He had a lot of drug problems in his life. Always loved his vocals, never had a problem with it at all. I thought he was a really good singer, and literally, when he sounded a little bit flat or whatever, it almost seemed like it was on purpose to me. So it never felt like, I was never like thinking, oh dear, this guy's not a good singer. I always felt like it was almost literally on purpose. I love the humor. I love the lyrics. I love that voice. It was a very, very weird, fresh voice to put on top of this music. And the music here, I just played this album to death when it came out. Again, to me, it almost feels like the, if you took the first 2 albums and said, what are all the good songs from this period of the band? They all got clumped onto the second album. And every song's kind of a masterpiece on here. Faster Disco, cool, heavy one. Even Anne's song, which is that cool poppy one with a big, you know, halting 4/4 rhythm, but kind of like pop bass on it. Chinese Arithmetic, so heavy. Probably one of my favorite songs by them of all time, R&R. That's the one that, growing up in the middle, it burns. You know, that one, very, very cool tune as well, super heavy. I love Blood. Spirit is really heavy. Death March, not so crazy about. The Crab song is really cool. It's really mellow at the beginning and then gets heavy. But yeah, what I loved about this record was this really feels like a blueprint record for the creativity matching, you know, creativity using a new kind of heaviness that you get out of grunge. So Soundgarden is you know, up and coming at this time as well. So this is April 23rd, 87. I believe Soundgarden might have had their first EP out at this point. Yeah. So grunge is kind of coming along. There's some grunge samplers out, but you've got Jane's Addiction and like I say, the Minneapolis stuff. But I just love the humor on here. It just kept you sort of interested. I think Chuck has loads of personality, and obviously the band has loads of personality. They're doing these brand new things. Again, there's a lot of post-punk in what they're doing. Post-punk is a kind of music that really has a lot of big but stilted and awkward drum beats, and then bass guitar is very prominent in post-punk, and you're getting that here. But we're not in rainy, dark England doing this. We're in sunny California, so it's really like, it feels out of place. But they're just like pioneering a whole new kind of music. And as I said earlier, you know, nu metal finds its roots big time in this. You know, rap metal. You know, here they are, kind of rapping. You know, a lot of singing, but a lot of rap, which is kind of what nu metal is. It's dovetailing the two together, and you're getting that on this record. But yeah, just obviously one of the worst album covers of all time in every way possible. It's hard to imagine a worse album. And they even have a stupid band name that's like, what does Faith No More even mean? It's ridiculous, right? Introduce Yourself's a stupid title. I always thought Introduce Yourself though. At a minute 32, it's a little bit like their Cheap Trick Hello There or their Thin Lizzy Are You Ready, right?
Yeah,
like short rocker to get things going, because introduce yourself, Robbie, Mikey, you know. I just love that part in that song. So yeah, just tons of personality. Love the songs. So when this came out and when the next album came out, they literally sounded to me almost like 2 different bands, but I loved both of them equally.
Yeah, they totally sound like 2 different bands, like from album to album there. It's like, it's crazy, right? Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I think there's some really great stuff on that album. I just can't get into his vocals.
Yeah.
What are you going to do, right? All right, my number 2 is The Real Thing from '89. And like I said before, I played the hell out of this when it first came out. This was different. It was fresh. It's funny because I actually bought this before I bought Introduce Yourself. And then I went and I bought the cassette of Introduce Yourself. I had that, or did I buy that for, I don't even remember now because I had it on cassette. So I must have bought it bought it first. Anyway, but yeah, I totally agree with that. Terrible album cover on there. I was just like, what is this? Not that this is fantastic either, but like I said, I still feel as groundbreaking as this period was for the band. I still think that, man, they were really early to the game. You got to wonder if you push this up 2 years, what kind of business they would have done. I don't know. They always seem way ahead of the curve for me. But from out of nowhere, great, big, bright, proggy keyboards all over the place, catchy, a lot of really cool riffs. Patton, really cool singer. Again, we would only see glimpses of what he would eventually reveal himself to be going forward. Epic, that was all over MTV, all over you couldn't not turn on anything that was playing music and hear that song. You want it all, but you can't have it. It's just really cool song, really good arrangement. It's metal, it's rap metal, it's funky, it's got everything. It captivated listeners all over the world. Falling to Pieces, great song. Surprise You're Dead is like full blown thrash. So they could really rock out when they wanted to.
On kind of a polyrhythmic counter rhythm sort of thing, right? So,
yeah, and it's like what, like a minute and a half, dun, 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 dun. It's galloping, it's thrashing.
And it goes into the groove part, yeah.
Yep. It's really, really
and
cool.
You could tell they're such massive music fans that when they do something that they don't normally do, they do it absolutely correctly because they totally know thrash. They just don't do it.
Yeah.
So it's like you could tell they have an encyclopedic knowledge of music, this band, right?
Yeah, they do. And we have to wonder. I always thought that Jim Martin was the big metal guy in this band. And when he left, I think they lost a little bit of that. And so you have to wonder if like he was the driving force behind all the metal leanings that they did. But who knows? Zombie Eater is another great song, big symphonic metal. The title track is absolutely epic. Love that. The Morning After, good groovy rock song. Woodpecker from Mars, again, another amazing instrumental. I would have loved to have heard like a whole album of stuff like that. I just really, really dig that. And then you got one of the greatest cover songs of all time in War Pigs. Just amazing stuff here. And still love it. And it's funny, like you said earlier, it's like it's almost like you want to rank this a little lower, but then you go and you re-listen to it and you're like, oh man, every song is great on here. It really is. And you have every player on this album, you hear almost every song, you hear the bass, you hear those keyboards, you hear the drums, you hear the guitars, all these instruments are just like featured in a great way due to the production. And it's just a really cool album, I think is held up pretty well.
Cool. All right. All right. So my number one, my last one, my top one, Faith No More. Love this catalog. As we've said, I think we started at a 7.5 and then we're well into the 10s at this point. But King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime. I rate this super high because it is one of that period of the band that just keeps giving and giving, that you never feel you master the whole thing. And it's out of respect for their creativity that I want to rate this top, because this and Album of the Year and Soul Invictus, as you rightly said, Pete, kind of represents, even though it's a baffling, cool, creative, weird sound, you could say that these three albums together and maybe a little Angel Dust as well represent the true spirit of the band. But what I like about this album is that it's just a little bit more conservative than Angel Dust. And I just love the commerciality when it comes out. We have Trey Spruance in the band. I don't know what difference that makes exactly, because I still feel the songwriting team is Billy and Roddy. But I love Ugly in the Morning with Mike going crazy on the vocals. I think this is the album where he really comes into his own with knowing how to use that toolbox and not distract from the songs. I love Evidence, like a nice cool one. What a Day is a good short heavy one. I love Take This Bottle. So here you go, like what am I, a poser or whatever? I love the most commercial things Faith No More can possibly do. I'm fine with that, I'll admit it. So I love that they do this great little ballad, essentially conservative ballad, just like Just a Man. Also mellow, they're both great. Get Out, super heavy one. So I just love the tightness, the economy, the fact that the songs are a little more straightened out on this. And I find Album of the Year is going back a little bit more to that Angel Dust feel, where I'm a little more standoffish and not loving it as much. But this one it's like almost just the perfect chemistry between accessibility and weirdness for me. And that's why, this one I play over and over again. And I just find those songs so catchy, yet they're just not being super commercial about what they're doing. And at this point, everything's gone quiet around them, right? I mean, they're a cult band again. They're 2 records into we're not the It Band anymore. We're not on, remember they made the cover of Rolling Stone, didn't they?
Yeah.
With the Real Thing. But at this point, they're 2 records removed from having that. I mean, the last record went gold. This one didn't even certify. So they're just doing their thing, and I love the little bit of correction to it, and so it's almost perfect. So all my favorite songs of the key Faith No More period are, concentrated on this one. So there you go, King for a Day. Cool for
Yeah, I can't say I can argue that too much. I mean, that's it's a strong record. It really is. My number one, in case you haven't figured it out, is Angel Dust. All right. So yeah, I love the weirdness and the heaviness of a lot of this album. It's easily their most out there album. And I remember at the time, again, still high on this one from a couple years before, and then this thing comes out, and you either like were on board, or you were like, holy crap, that doesn't sound anything like this. I'm not digging it. Because I knew a lot of people that were like that just, they listened to this once or twice and like, no, thank you. That's nothing like that album I love that came out a couple of years ago. But I totally dug it. I did not dig that at all, but I thought there were some great songs on here, and I still think it. Land of Sunshine, again, right from the get-go, you're hearing all these little things that Mike Patton can do with his voice. Heavy, kind of progressive to Caffeine, big groovy song, but it's still really heavy, dramatic, big fat riffs from Mr. Martin there. And those maniacal vocals. I mean, man, when this guy wants to, he's just, you can't even explain like kind of what goes on with his vocals at times. Midlife Crisis, great song. So 90s sounding, so catchy, should have been a huge hit for them. Smaller and Smaller, another really cool song. We talked about Be Aggressive before. RV is kind of like a weird song. It's kind of him crooning and all that, but it's, pretty neat. Everything's Ruined, another really good song on here. You got Malpractice, which is just absolutely psychotic. You got Kindergarten. Crack Hitler's a really cool, weird, kind of jazzy, funky song with those wah-wah guitars. And then you got the big, huge, distorted riffs and those schizophrenic vocals on Jizz Lobber, which I always thought was just an insane track, but to me, terribly exciting. So I like the kind of, let's just go for it and put out an album we want to put out, and it may sell, it may not sell, kind of mentality here. And it's all over the place. And there's some stuff on here I really, really love, and there's some stuff on here that I really, really respect just for them wanting to go there, So yeah, that's my number one.
Wow. Yeah, cool.
So we're all over the place on this ranking.
Yeah, we had a bunch of different narratives, right? We had the like Chuck, don't like Chuck narrative. We had the and you love the super creativity, and I like it too. But I think one narrative with me is, again, I want my commercial Faith No More. So yeah, it's funny. That's pretty cool. And this reminds me of, I wanted to say when we went on Guitar Hack too, our Black Sabbath lists were all over the place too, right? We all had little strange eccentricities about where we put stuff there too. So yeah, but that just proves how cool this catalog is. Like what a creative, odd, strange catalog. That's kind of all over the place, and all, like, again, when I went through these 7 albums again, I just thought, man, Like this literally starts at a 7.5 and quickly goes up into the 8s and 9s and 10s. So it's literally out of all the shows I think I've been on with you with this ranking thing, it's like probably the one where all the albums are super good.
Do you think like when we get to a point where we're looking at like the history of rock, you know, maybe 20, 30 years from now, when rock may be something different, do you think we're going to look back on a band like Faith No More as that band that just a lot of people just didn't get because of how eccentric it is and how like varied the music is and how it doesn't follow any kind of principle, and you know, you can't categorize it for the most part?
Yeah, well, you know, the funny thing is when we broke these things up into all those stuff that we did, all those episodes we did for Metal Evolution, there were like 11 episodes, and we did have the new metal episode. It's funny, as time goes on, even people are going to even forget what new metal even meant, or rap metal, like all these different genres. And this is one that is very derided, but yet it sold tons and tons and tons of records. But you know, Faith No More was a huge part of the narrative of building up to this idea of quote unquote funk metal first. I mean, there was even dance metal. Remember, we talked about in the old days, there was a term called dance metal, there was funk metal, then there was rap metal, then it was finally
Groove metal and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're always going to be a big kind of anchor part of that story. I think they should be an anchor part of the grunge story as well, just because of the creativity. You know, to me, grunge almost started in California, really, not Seattle. I mean, it really does start with the Minutemen and Fire Hose, and not Firehouse, definitely not Firehouse.
No.
Fire Hose, and Jane's Addiction and Faith No More, and even Red Hot Chili Peppers to some extent, and that whole Minneapolis thing with Soul Asylum, like good, creative, daring, odd, heavy band. Meat Puppets in Arizona, Husker Du in Minneapolis. So grunge kind of starts all over the place, Smashing Pumpkins, and then granted, Seattle definitely had its own punk scene and a lot of nascent grunge itself. You know, that you know, because you're from there, it's truly grunge. But so Faith No More is important there as well. But yeah, they're always going to be an oddball band. And I think this thing about where will they be remembered is also just going to be affected by how many more Faith No More albums are we ever going to get, right? Do they stay in the public consciousness or not, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard any rumblings about anything new coming from them, so who knows? Who knows?
Pretty weird. And they're so well embraced when they do come out, and they're a huge band live. They probably make a lot of money playing live, right?
Yeah.
When that album came out, I mean, Soul Invictus did not certify, but that doesn't matter. It's like everybody was talking about Faith No More again, and they had that, didn't they? They were all in white, and they had the flowers on stage and stuff. It reminded you of those old Bill Ward pictures with the flowers on the drum stand. That was spooky. Remember that? Circus 1975, the big silver cross. Bill Ward's, I think the drums were white, and then all those bouquets of flowers. It looked like a funeral, right?
Yeah, it's like, what is this all about, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. I've never asked them, but I wonder if they got that idea, were inspired with the flowers from that whole Bill Ward, because that was really cool when Sabbath did that. I don't even know if they did that. If that was just like someone threw some flowers on the stage and they stuck them on the drum riser or whatever. But I remember those pictures from Circus, getting Circus as a kid. I was a subscriber, and getting those and seeing that and going, wow, there's something really spooky about flowers on a drum riser, right?
Sabbath in white with flowers. Yeah, I don't know about this. All right, everybody, there you have it. Ranking the albums of Faith No More. In the comments below, please rank them as you like them. Remember, there's no right or wrong answer. We all hear these albums differently. As you can tell by Martin and mine, our rankings were completely different. So I think we can all agree those are some pretty cool albums here. So Martin is coming back in just a few days. At the end of the week, we will be ranking the catalog of German metal legends, except a band that has been asked for forever here on the channel, and we're finally getting to it. So stay tuned for that Friday morning. here on Sea of Tranquility. I want to thank Martin for coming. Martin, you got any books you want to plug that are coming out or have just come out?
Well, yeah, right now I'm in the middle of just last week, I got the new Angel book, The Fortune on the Rocks with Angel, and that's selling really well. And they're about half gone at this point. So selling a lot of those. So speaking of white, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big, thick book, 326 pages. It's got some color sections, but lots of black and white photography and the whole story of the band right up to Risen. So you can get that at martinpopoff.com.
Cool. So check that out, everybody. And there's other good stuff coming from Martin in the months ahead. So he'll talk about that when the time is coming. So be on the lookout and visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. So like I said, coming up on the channel, Martin and I'll be ranking the catalog of Accept on Friday tonight. Don't miss out on the Hudson Valley Squares. Monday night must-see TV. Tonight is game show night. So we're going to be throwing all sorts of questions at the squares, musical, movies, food, wacky trivia, all sorts of stuff. So that's happening tonight. You don't want to miss that. Also going to be interviewing Todd Zuckerman from Styx coming up later this week as well. And today, also this afternoon, favorite guitar solo is Frank Marino. All right. A guy that Martin knows quite well. And joining me for that episode are two SOT alumni, Mike Blackburn and Ryan Sparks. So that should be a lot of fun today. So stay tuned for that and all sorts of other stuff happening this week. So for Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Take care, everybody.